So we try to have this annually. And we appreciate Mark. He's the Mark Martin. Did you say that?
Yeah, that's good.
Professional registered parliamentary. And I'll let him introduce himself. And he was also our speaker at the municipal clerks training in St. Petersburg last year. He did such a good job that we invited him to be our speaker this year. And we're proud that he took the time to come. It means a lot to us. And make sure everybody signs in so that we can get a certificate to you, okay? So you get your points.
Thank you, Claire. So the question I get from everybody is why, more or less, why did you decide to learn this? Basically, I had to. I had a client. My name is Mark Moriarty, thank you. I'm a city attorney for the city of Cape Coral. I've been a municipal attorney representing councils and commissions for 27 years. And the question that I get routinely from lawyers, parliamentarians, council members, commissioners is why? Why did you want to learn this book? They look at this book and their eyes go in the back of their heads. And basically the short responses I had a client they were just nasty. They fought over everything, and they each thought they knew the rules and dug in their heels on the rules to the point where the meeting didn't progress. And I, as the lawyer, was frequently being asked who was right, who was wrong. And I knew Robert's rules, but I didn't know Robert's rules. So that's what led me on this journey to become certified and to go through the classes and then to give presentations for the City Clerks Association. So I've done speaks like this to various communities throughout Florida. I like it. Any issue I find that you're having in your municipality or your county, there is an answer in that book. So if there is a rogue council member out there that's doing things that you're just looking at and saying, that can't be right, the book, I'm confident, addresses it. So before we get into the nitty-gritty of the material, I just want to give a little background as to why we're here, give a little bit of historical context. So as we probably all remember from history class, in 1861, General Beauregard fires on Fort Sumter and the official start of the Civil War. That's in 1861. A year later, General Roberts, who was a classmate of General Lee, is in New Bedford, Massachusetts. Is anybody here from Massachusetts? Are they people from Massachusetts? Are they Massachusettsians or are they Massachusettsers? I don't know either. They're from Massachusetts. But so what I have since come to appreciate or to learn is that New Bedford at the time of the Civil War was one of the richest municipalities in the Union. It had a thriving whaling fleet. It was they were selling whale oil, and that was the center, the financial center of the North. They were just very rich. General Roberts is a classmate of General Lee. They were at West Point together. They're both engineers. General Roberts worked apparently with General Lee, worked on the fort in South Carolina. And in New Bedford, Massachusetts, there's a similar fort at the mouth of the river that protects the city. So we have a lot of clerks from other municipalities here today. I'm curious, what is the longest meeting you've ever had?
I had a 10-and-a-half-hour one about a month ago.
What was the issue?
Land development.
Okay, 10 and a half hours. Does anybody beat that?
Ours isn't allowed to go past 12.
By rule?
Yes.
12 hours or 12 midnight?
12 midnight. One time we had one that went on to 2 a.m. So after that, they adopted a resolution that goes past 11, mayor has to approve it and can extend it 1 hour and no later.
And then business picks up the next morning? Is that how it works, or just
No, they have to wait for the next meeting.
the next regular meeting?
We're very lucky, we average between 2 and 3 hours. So we don't have to.
And do you remember what the issue was?
No, that's 14.
Anybody beat 10 and a half hours? So, the city of New Bedford, this is the First Baptist Church in New Bedford, Massachusetts. The city of New Bedford is having a meeting to discuss the defense of the city against Confederate attack. And they realize that General Roberts, who's built the fort, who is an engineer from West Point, is in town, so they invite him to talk about how they're going to defend the city. Sumter, South Carolina, was just attacked. Everybody, what you can imagine, everybody in the municipality, what greater risk is there to the municipality than a foreign invasion or a foreign attack? So they know General Roberts is there, and they invite him, and this is from Robert's Rules of Order, and I'm going to read to you a provision out of it. Without warning, General Roberts was asked to preside over a meeting said to have related to the defense of the city in the event of Confederate attack from the sea. The meeting is to have lasted for 14 hours, and he did not know how, but he felt that the worst thing he could do was to decline. Quote, "My embarrassment was supreme," he wrote. "I plunged in, trusting to Providence that the assembly would behave itself." Right. But with the plunge went the determination I would never attend another meeting until I knew something of parliamentary law. And that started him to write the book. He goes on to say, many years later, or the foreword goes on to say, many years later, in a lecture hall in Cincinnati, General Roberts stated that, quote, "Friction as to what constituted parliamentary law was indeed no uncommon thing. Each member of these organizations had brought from his home state different and often strong convictions as to what were correct parliamentary rules, and a presiding officer usually followed the customs of the locality from which he came, and not so much the rules." So I find that's true when I go around the state, that everybody does it a little bit different. And Florida being Florida, is we get many people from up north, and the people in Michigan know, and the people in Pennsylvania know, and they come down here and they know, and they're going to tell us how, and it becomes a recipe for disaster. Okay, so he begins and he writes the book, starting with the Civil War. So, in a nutshell, parliamentary procedure, it tries to do these four things. Maintain decorum. At the end of the day, it's the will of the majority that's going to carry the day. It's the will of the majority, but you can't trample on the minority. Why? Because anybody who's in the majority today is in the what tomorrow? Right, so you have the majority today, and you're excited you have the majority, but you ought to be, or at least the rules try to keep the minority protected. And then it's just to facilitate an orderly transaction of the business. So the basics. Every member sitting up here, every person that's elected is elected the same way. They all represent the community. They all have the same power. They're all vested with the same authorization to represent the community. Each item presented is open to full and fair debate. If it's going to make it onto the agenda, then admittedly it's important to discuss, it's important to debate. So if it's on the agenda, we're going to give it a fair consideration or a full consideration. And we're only going to talk about one thing at a time. And only one person speaks at a time. And everyone, central to that is that everyone gets a turn to speak. So today what we're going to talk about, we narrowed it down just to basically 4 topics. There are many more topics, but for today's presentation, we're going to hit agenda, motions, debate, and then enforcing the rules. And as I'm proceeding, if I'm going through this and you have a question, I like a interchange. If you have a question, or if I'm hitting something that you're not quite understanding, asking the question generally will prompt one of your neighbors to follow up, and I don't mind that at all. So if I'm speaking too fast, or I'm going over something, I'm glossing over something that needs...
What I'll do is, somebody doesn't have a question, I'll take the mic over to them, okay, so that we can hear it in the tape.
Thank you, Clara. So the agenda, the agenda is crucially important, and in my practice, I find that the agenda oftentimes is glossed over, is that it's not given the attention that it's due. Items are coming in at the last minute. The clerk or the city manager is just plowing things on in order to get to a deadline. In my opinion, those organizations that have a clear, hard stop for agenda items run smoothly and fantastically. It's the communities that are trying to throw something on at the last minute because there's going to be a hiatus or something's going to happen. That is just, it just breeds angst. It's just if the agenda process rolls smoothly, the meetings here generally roll smoothly. So why is the agenda so important? It just organizes everything. It's crucially important. You provide a systematic order of business. And central to this is giving notice. I mean, if you're going to the meeting and you think that the agenda is going to have items 1 through 20 and you show up at the door and it's items 1 through 25, now you're like, what is this, right? You're sitting down, you've been given an agenda or you've been given information, and even if you're a member of the community or you're a commissioner, you're trying to throw something together at the last minute, and it just has the propensity to create havoc. Can I say that? Can I say it that way? It has the propensity to create havoc. It's not something that's systematically rolling through the organization. And then lastly, the agenda keeps everybody focused. You know, if somebody in the audience or somebody at the dais is taking the group to the left, the agenda just brings them right back. And it's not a personality thing, it's the agenda, the document. So the agenda is crucially important. So it's so important, who controls it? Whose agenda is it? Is it the clerk's agenda? Is it the city manager's agenda? Pardon? Ultimately, it's the commission's agenda, that's right. Ultimately, it's the commission who decides who's going to be on the agenda. But in your organizations, what's happening is your department heads have an item. They need a new VACCON truck or something, or they need a new fire truck. So the fire chief puts in a request, presumably through purchasing. That flows through to the clerk's office or to the city manager's office, and an agenda item packet is put together and it's put on to an agenda, and that agenda is distributed to everybody, or it's distributed to the news and the public and the commissioners. But is that the agenda? Well, it's a draft, right? When does it become the agenda? Well, yes, it's when it's published, you're giving notice to everybody, like if you come to the meeting, this is what's going to be discussed. But the agenda becomes the agenda when these folks say it's the agenda. And on your order of business, I think it's step 4, they approve the agenda. And what happens at that moment? That is the standing order of this body. Like, okay, the city manager or the city clerk has published this agenda. They've given us the agenda, and I move to approve the agenda. That's, in my view, that's crucially important, because now what? That is an order of the body. And what is it saying to everybody is we're not going to deviate from this. Okay? We have just approved this. So whoever is going to take us to the left or to the right, who doesn't focus on the agenda is what? They're out of order. Right. They can be taken to task for not following the agenda. So that's always something good to keep in mind, that the city manager's agenda is the city manager's agenda. It's not the official agenda. Like we get into squabbles with the local news a lot as to, can I have a copy of the agenda? We don't mean to be obstructionists, but what they're asking for is, like, you're getting the clerk's agenda, or you're getting, you see the distinguishing, what I'm trying to distinguish is that this is just a proposed agenda. And that they'll want to do stories or they want interviews, and it's, well, it's not the agenda yet, you know. Do you have a comment about it? Well, come to the meeting, and we'll talk about it. Yes, ma'am.
So for the city, the consulting that I work for, they actually approve the agenda for the next meeting.
So,
The city commission votes on the items for the next meeting, so basically 2 weeks prior.
so at the regular meeting prior, the city commission is voting on the agenda in 2 weeks?
Correct.
That's fantastic.
Yeah. And then let's say there is that emergency purchase, or emergency something that needs to come up. To add that item, and that item has to be voted on as a start, we call it a start item.
At the beginning of the next meeting, if they're going to amend the agenda,
And if they vote no?
it's not on.
It's not.
Well, that's,
So, I mean, we're a little, we're doing what you're doing, but in a different time frame.
yeah. So your municipality, you're so forward-thinking that you have your organization has everything ready to go 2 weeks prior to the
The
presentation.
attachment's not ready, but the title's on.
The titles are ready. All right. Yeah. But so the governing body is approving the document.
So they kind of know what's coming before them for their next meeting.
Right, and so does the public.
Correct.
Yeah, that's fantastic. That's great. So who controls the agenda again? It is the city, it's the body. Hopefully it's unanimous. Then what happens? After the question?
Once the agenda is approved for that meeting, can the order change during the meeting?
Yes,
Items be-
yes, you can, and I'll get into that in a little bit.
And any agenda items be added prior to the approval of the agenda? And how does that meet with public notice?
So you're asking how do items get added to the agenda?
Let's say you have an agenda that you sit down, there's 10 items, there's something else pressing, can the mayor or anyone on the board add an agenda item at that time, or does that violate public notice?
If it's a regular meeting, the idea of a regular meeting is that you're going to consider the organization's business, and any business can be heard at a regular meeting. So that's the public notice component. So if somebody's coming on in the 11th hour and is handing a contract, the idea of a regular meeting is that's why you have regular meetings. You're the second and third, or the first and third Thursday of every month. So you're giving notice to the community, you're giving notice to everybody at the beginning of the year that the organization is going to have regular meetings on these dates. And because it's a regular meeting, not every item needs to be advertised. At a special meeting, everything has to be advertised. So if somebody's coming in at the last minute and wanting to add something to the agenda, it's not, in my view, it's not so much a public notice issue as it is your rules issue. If you have a rule that everything has to be in at the clerk's office the Wednesday prior to the meeting so it can be adequately published and the other commissioners can have notice, to me, the objection is, I'm sorry, the board is not prepared to talk about this. It's not so much that the community or the citizens aren't made aware of it. It's more, I can't vote on this. You haven't given me the sufficient time to review the materials. And then Roberts gives you the ability to continue items, to postpone them to a date certain. But I don't remember looking at the Madeira Beach's rules, whether there was a hard date that it had to be in the clerk's office. Was there, Claire? Do you have a hard date?
Testing. Ours is in the BOC policy handbook. It's by 3 o'clock, I believe it's 3 of that Wednesday. But if they have any emergency items or something very, very important, then they have them in by noon or 3 o'clock or early that day on Thursday, but not afterwards. So they do have a procedure, but the real procedure is getting them in on Wednesday. But like you said, on a regular meeting, pointing out at Robert, because in their BOC policy handbook, they adopt both.
Yeah.
So if they were to add an item, they can add an item at a regular meeting.
Yeah, so it comes back to the commission. It comes back to somebody, you have the agenda, and when you're approving the agenda, are you going to approve it with that last minute item? I mean, that becomes the issue.
We have a deadline to get it published, to get it out there and get it published.
Right. But what I'm trying to distinguish, Clara, is that you have your administrative procedures, but then once it comes here and once it's on the floor, that vote that you take at the beginning of the meeting determines whether the item is going to be let in or not. So if you have items 1 through 20 and you're going to approve the agenda, you can say, I'm sorry, I'm only going to approve items 1 through 19. We can talk about 20 later. And then it becomes an issue for the majority of the commissioners, whether that item is going to come on or not. So after the agenda is approved, who then runs the meeting? The chair or the mayor. That becomes the presiding officer. Under the Roberts Rules, the presiding officer then has discretion. The mayor is the mayor for a reason. The mayor is going to preside over the meeting for a reason. He or she is going to run the meeting as they see it, as they want to, subject to what? Subject to the commission letting them. They're subject to what was approved on the agenda. So that's bullet point 2 there. The ultimate authority for establishing an agenda rests with the commission. The commission can establish rules and regulations about how the meeting is going to be run. All right, I'm going to leave agenda now. I'm going to go to motions. Any questions on that? All right, motions. So what is a motion before we get into motions in general? What is it? Does anybody want to venture a guess or an educated guess? It's a proposal, more or less. It's just, I'm vested with certain powers. I'm elected into office. I'm a representative of the people, and I propose the organization does. So what is the tantamount procedure is you have to be recognized. I mean, I understand in small boards and small commissions, there's a certain amount of familiarity that goes on, and clinging to the rules might be laborious in such a small organization that you are with routinely. But when I walk into a meeting room such as this and the presiding officer is saying to everybody, you are recognized for 3 minutes, or Commissioner, you are recognized, what is that impliedly saying to everybody who's witnessing or everybody who's going to be providing comment? There are rules here. I have to be recognized before I can talk. I mean, I can't stress how important it is that speakers, before they speak, be recognized. Even if it's a nod or even I was given this advice early in my career, and I like to leave it with you too, is be strict with the rules at the beginning of the meeting, particularly if you're going to have a lot of public comment. Be strict with the rules with proclamations. Proclamations or something along those lines. As everybody's relaxed, they're going to take pictures and all that stuff. But if you can signal to the people in the audience who are mad or angry or they want to communicate, but they hear the chair say something along the lines of, you are recognized. You are recognized for 3 minutes, or whatever it is. And you see what you're trying to set guidelines for the meeting that's going to follow. So once a commissioner is recognized, the commissioner makes a motion. We'll get into this in a little bit more detail later. Is that Roberts guides us that there's no discussion without a pending motion. Routinely, let me just finish my thought and I'll go back to you, is routinely I'll see communities. Agenda item number 17 is to designate Billy Bowlegs Park or designate Billy Bowlegs Park. And then they talk about it. I take my kids to Billy Bow. No. We either going to have a motion right off the bat or not. Why? We want an efficient meeting. Why are we going to spend a lot of time talking about in my example, Billy Bowlegs Park, if nobody else wants to talk about it. So if you have a commissioner, if you have a chair that's strict on this process, lead with a motion. You may find that there's not a second. You may find that right away there's no interest. So you could just move on to the next item. You don't have to spend a lot of time dickering and debating and going back and forth. So if right after you get recognized, Commissioner, do you have a motion? What's your motion? I move to designate Billy Bowlegs Park a national monument. He was first.
I believe the mayor cannot make a motion. Is that true?
Here you go.
I believe the mayor is not eligible to make a motion. And where is that?
Yes.
According to Robert's Rules of Law, but in all this, where is it?
Yes, so parliamentary procedure, let me just step back a minute. If you watch the House, it's the House of Representatives, the vice president is not voting, right? The vice president is designated the Speaker of the House. But the vice president doesn't vote unless what? There's a tie or there's a threat of a tie. They vote to break a tie. If you look at the Speaker of the House in Parliament, that is a voting member of the House of Commons, but he or she gives up their ability to vote when they become Speaker. So the idea maybe I'm getting ahead of myself, Robert's Rules of Order is not just for city councils. Churches use it, conventions use it. So it's being applied or it's being shoehorned into 5,000 people conventions to 300 person churches, and then to councils of 5, 7, or 8, or 10, right? So the starting point for parliamentary procedure is that the chair is going to be impartial. The chair is not going to vote. But what happens with city charters throughout Florida is the mayor is given the presiding ability, and then he or she votes. So that's the dichotomy in Florida, is that the charter says the mayor has all the powers that all the other commissioners have. So so a good mayor or a good presiding officer on sensitive issues, in my view, ought to refrain from taking the first stab at it because they're running the meeting. But there's nothing in the rules that specifically prohibit the chair from diving in. There's nothing, unless you have a standing rule, unless your organization has said it. By and large, Robert's Rules of Procedure is going to be silent on that point because they're not voting. They're generally not voting members. Do you see what I'm trying to distinguish?
Well, I understand what you're saying, but once again, it's just like, it's not really written. It's understood.
It's understood, right. Right.
So if one of the people on our commission, Board of Commissioners, and the mayor wants to, he cannot propose a motion.
I'm going to drill down on what your comment. Throughout the meeting, the mayor has the ability through unanimous consent to run the meeting. If he gets to item 4, and item 4 is, I don't know, something mundane, or she gets to item 4 and it's something mundane, for him or her to go through the steps, in my view, unnecessarily delays the meeting. If it's something that's coming before the board that everybody in the room is in agreement with, it would be only natural for the mayor to say, let's move the item, or seeing no objection, item approved, and then moving on to the next agenda item. Now, but if it's something significant to the community, Roberts does say that the chair should pass the gavel, and if he or she wants to make the motion. So there's, I guess symbolically, they're not presiding over the meeting anymore, but but there's no hard and fast instruction in Roberts for that provision. Did I answer it?
What I was going to say is our mayor does not motion, but she does vote. But that's according to our charter. So I guess you would have to look at your charter and see what your charter says on that.
There was a question over here.
Yeah, following your order there, it's kind of confusing to me because when we approve the agenda, we've basically made a motion to discuss every item that's on the agenda. So to actually make a motion that we're going to discuss something that, a specific item on the agenda seems contrary. The way we do it now, once we vote on a agenda item and we open the next agenda item, typically we open the floor to the public first. Once the public is finished commenting, that is closed, and the commissioners are given an opportunity to speak on the item, and then someone makes a motion on that item, whether they want to make the motion to approve or to approve with conditions, whatever that motion is, and a vote is taken. After that vote, if it's not approved, it cannot be brought back up with other conditions. So I'm kind of taken aback by your procedure there to make a motion to discuss. It's very confusing to me.
So I assume from listening to you that your agenda, the motion is motion to approve Billy Bowlegs, and it's printed that way right on the agenda.
No. That item may be one of 12 on the agenda.
Right.
But when we approve the agenda, we are basically approving to discuss every agenda item individually.
Okay. So, yes, I think I understand your question then. So if you've already approved the agenda, you're going to be discussing those items. Why is Roberts suggesting that it proceed with a motion? Why is bullet number 2 up on the screen? Presumably, if I can dig into your question, is if the commission has already said that it wants to discuss it, then it would be redundant for there to be a motion to proceed or not.
That's my point.
Okay, so that's valid concern. You may find there may not be the support when it comes to the individual item being considered. Right, it's been published, the community is here, the agenda is approved by the commission. Now when it comes up for consideration, for deliberation by the body, whoever gets recognized first may not be a proponent of it, may move to deny. Right off the bat, I move to deny item number 4. Then if there's a second, or if there's not a second, then what does that do? Is that lets the person who's made the motion to deny know what? They have no support. So are they going to be antagonistic to that through the debate by the governing body? Will they? I don't know. Maybe they will.
No, I understand, but it's hard. I'm, again, trying to understand why you would make a motion prior. What is the motion? The motion to approve something and then you're going to discuss it? Or it may be a different motion after you've discussed it. It may be a motion to approve with conditions. It may be a motion to table this for another workshop before we actually make a vote. It may be a motion to deny. You don't know what that motion's going to be until you've had an opportunity to discuss it. So I'm having a hard time understanding. And following your procedure here, do you make two motions? You make a motion to approve it and then you, or to discuss it, and then you make a motion to approve it after the fact. It just seems like an extra step here that I don't understand, that we don't currently use, and so.
Many smaller organizations who are familiar with one another, and Roberts discusses this, don't have to strictly abide by what's in the rules. But if you think along the lines of a larger organization, people are coming to the organization to find out what the body is going to do. The very first, according to Roberts, the very first time a commissioner or a council member is recognized, they ought to be putting, you as a commissioner are putting forth to everybody, move to approve or I'm moving to deny. And then what that does, if there's a second, is that galvanizes everybody. If I'm on your side and I don't want, and you say move to deny, I don't have to give public comment, I don't think. They've already, and there's a second, well, okay, it already looks like, so it's, maybe I misspoke a little bit about you're asking for permission to speak about it. It's just the tool to lead with a motion directs everybody's attention to the conversation that follows. And I suspect, if I can interrupt you just for a second, I suspect the confusion may be clarified as we proceed through the presentation.
I appreciate that. Just as a second, when you're talking, we had a discussion about voting order earlier this session, and it had always been in our procedures that the mayor would vote last, and it was brought up, and we ultimately voted to keep it that way, but I didn't know if you wanted to comment on that. The presiding officer actually voting last or not voting at all. I know we have a board of 5, and you need a minimum of 3 votes, regardless of the quorum, to pass something, but I just didn't know if you had any comment on that.
I do. Roberts talks about the chair trying to oscillate between those in favor of the motion and those against, with regards to order. So if the mayor is at the dais and the motion is to approve, well, you're going to go to the person who made the motion first. And then ideally, according to Roberts, the mayor, the presiding officer should be looking for what? Looking for the person to speak second. You need to be recognized, but they ought to be looking for someone who's against the proposal. It's to balance out the debate. And it's not to be so lump-sided that you're squashing the minority. It's that you're not steamrolling the minority. And as far as last, that just comes down to your standing rules. I mean, I've seen mayors even on roll call, or if it's really significant, have not a roll call vote, but all those in favor, do it a vocal, an oral vote. So you're not doing a specific aye, nay, those opposed, nay, and you just do it in one swoop.
So you're suggesting that order versus who made the order, or who made the motion, and then the second vote being who seconded it, you would oppose that, for what you're saying there.
Well, what Roberts talks about is the chair, whoever makes the motion, has the opportunity to speak first. The second is whether the body should take time to discuss the matter. You may find that there's not a support for a second. But if there is a second, Roberts talks about the chair oscillating back and forth between those in favor and those against, those in favor and those against. And even when there's a public comment, is to try to organize the speakers in such a fashion that you're hearing a proponent and an opponent, a proponent and an opponent. So you're not just getting one view, because what generally happens is if you want an efficient meeting, you don't want the redundancy. If you tell everybody in favor line up here, everybody opposed line up here, well then if people are just repeating the same thing over and over again, you don't necessarily, you're losing the efficiency. you may be able to call the question right away and move on to another item. But I think your question might be clarified throughout the rest of the presentation. I saw other hands. Yes, ma'am?
So our commission follows this procedure, except between 5 and 6, the mayor, thank you. The mayor asks for public comment. And I haven't seen that before, unless it was like an official hearing. And I'm wondering if that's necessary.
So let's talk about public comment for a minute. We'll take a little detour. For ordinances, of course, and some items, they have to take public comment during the item. So it's always a question as to when is the best time to do that. Just from an efficiency perspective, is to hear the public comment first, close the public comment, close the public, and the chair makes it very clear to everybody, now that the public comment is closed, we'll bring it to the commission to discuss the matter. And then if somebody in the public wants to speak, well, then what happens is members of the body, we have someone from the public that wants to speak, shall we let that person, shall we reopen public comment and bring it back and let them speak or not? And then the body, just by a vote, yes or no. You know, is it duplicative or is it going to actually yield something? But, so I have also seen that too. I've seen that the motion is made, they have debated it, then the chair opens it up for public comment. The public comment completely sways the board. So, and that's another reason why the motion should be first, in my view, is now the motion's not going to pass. So from an efficiency standpoint, when is it better to have the public comment? Is it from a public participation? Most times they're going to want to know what my commissioner, how they're going to vote before I give my public comment. I hear that routinely. But under the rules, it's not. That's just the prerogative of the body when they want to hear the public comment. And keep in mind, under most jurisdictions, the public comment can give public comment at the beginning of the meeting, at the beginning of the item, at the end of the meeting. So if they're really aggrieved at how the body has voted, they can do what? They can always bring it up at the end of the meeting or at the beginning of the next meeting. They're not deprived of their public comment. All right, but I don't want to, any other questions on this? So I want to make a point, is after there's a motion made, and there's a second, the mayor then, or the presiding officer then restates the motion. Why? Because at that point in time, the mayor or the presiding officer should be determining whether the motion is out of order. So there's been a motion and a second, and then the presiding officer, until he or she repeats what the motion is, it's not subject to debate. It may be out of order. So then the mayor restates the motion, and by that, they're opening up debate. The commissioners debate the motion. Once the debate has ended, the mayor should orally say the debate has now ended and call for a vote. And this is important in my view too. It's how the mayor says what the motion is the official motion. So if it's a long meeting and there's been a lot of conversation or there's been a lot of debate about an item, and if the mayor restates the motion in a way that doesn't match the original motion maker, the official motion is how the mayor has stated it. Because what the mayor is the presider of the meeting, the mayor is been given the authority to run the meeting. So whether it's done intentionally or unintentionally, the official motion is how the mayor or the presiding officer is stating the motion. Commissioner Smith moved to Billy Bowlegs Park, but if ultimately at the end of the meeting, if the mayor restates the motion and calls for the vote, the official vote, the motion under Roberts is going to be how the mayor states it, or the presiding officer states it. So this goes to recognition. And again, if I, at the risk of repeating myself, when the mayor recognizes speakers, even by saying you're recognized for 3 minutes or you're recognized for 5 minutes, you're communicating to everybody in the chambers that that person has the right to speak right now. The chair must recognize any member who seeks the floor while they are entitled to it. And I underlined entitled to it because if you have an obstinate commissioner, if you have someone in the public, there is no legal authorization that that person must be recognized. And it's a way to impart discipline. You know, if someone is continually bringing up something, the mayor is within their prerogative to say, I'm not going to recognize you anymore. If you keep this behavior up, you're not going to be recognized. So it's why, that's why I underlined while they're entitled to it. Once you're recognized, you have the exclusive right to speak. No interruptions. I know that one gets violated often. So when you're going to, if someone does do that, once you're recognized, or if someone keeps interrupting, one of the tools that you have is to censure the person. And in order to censure the person is you have to have a vote, right? You have to put it out there. You have to have a resolution or something, and you have to do what? You have to explain what the person that you're censuring did. So I've gotten this video, and throughout the presentation, I have videos that I like to use to reinforce some of the things that I've been saying. And this is a council member, I can't remember the jurisdiction, but they're bringing somebody up. They're censuring somebody. So, and it's for recognition, for lack of recognition. So here it goes.
When reminded to be recognized before speaking in accordance with Robert's Rules of Order, Alderwoman Gibson Carter responded that this is effing bull.
So you can see the issue. Alderwoman Carter was speaking out and speaking out and speaking. So what did they do? They admonished her, and of course, somebody who's not going to be recognized or succumb to being recognized is going to have that reaction. So that just reinforces the importance, in my view, of recognition. So this goes a little bit about to what we were discussing earlier, is that Roberts talks about there is no discussion without a pending motion on the floor. There should always be a pending motion. You know, if some of the organizations you go to is, you know, everybody is quiet until there's a pending motion that's been seconded. And then the debate opens. Invariably, I'll go around and there's just conversation galore, and then they'll talk about for like 40 minutes, and then, okay, I'm ready for a motion. And it's like, oh man. A lot of that conversation can be done with, in my view, if the body knows at the outset that what we're talking about is the approval right off the bat, or what we're talking about is the denial right off the bat. We're not going to talk about approval and denial for 20 minutes and then decide on a motion. It's just if for organizations that you sit, that the motion, or put right on the agenda, I've seen that happen, is some clerks will put right on the agenda. The motion is to approve Billy Bowlegs Park as a national park. So when you approve the agenda, I thought that's maybe where you were going earlier, is that once you approve the agenda, you already have the motion, so now the group is free to talk about it. That may work, but it doesn't necessarily communicate to the gallery whether the commission is in favor or against. So this is the second bullet there. After the motion is made, the chair endeavors to alternate between speakers, those in favor and those opposed. The importance of a second. It's procedural. You don't necessarily need a second to continue. If the mayor knows that there's public support for it in a small meeting, they could just move right on through. They can use unanimous consent for a second, but here's an example where a second is needed. This is
Next item, resolution determining trustee position vacant.
Guess I'll make that motion
Okay, motion made by trustee Ramirez-Lewinsky,
for discussion.
we're waiting for a second. Still waiting for a second.
You ought to know you're not going to get one.
It dies.
You already made your speech, and so we don't want to hear it again, to be real honest with you.
So it
You're not
dies-
going to get a second.
Dies for lack of a second. It dies for,
I understand, trustee Segwelt.
well, how long are you gonna wait? I'm just asking a question. How long are you gonna wait?
Yeah, well, I'm still waiting for a second. Still waiting for a second.
Attorney Rhodes, is there any time limit on how long you have to wait before a motion dies for lack of a second? Or are we gonna sit here till midnight?
There's no time limit. The board has the right to make a motion as it does in all other instances.
Okay, is there any procedure that we can do to end this?
And the waiting, you mean?
Yes. Yes, end the waiting and move on. I'm glad you think this is funny.
It
I
is.
don't think it's
Not
funny.
you. Ann.
He's laughing too.
It's ridiculous is what it is. It's not funny, it's ridiculous.
Yeah, if the board determines that the time limit for making a motion is done, someone can make a motion to determine that there has been no second and move on to the
Okay.
next item.
I'll make that motion that there has been no second, ample time has been given, and it dies for lack of a second.
I'll second.
Thank you.
Okay?
Can I say something?
No, because there was no second.
They just had a second, so now
Well, they
we
just,
discuss
On a
that.
motion to move forward.
So that, it goes on
boy.
and on. So if we have time at the end, I'll happily go back to it, but it gets nasty. I mean, it just starts going down from there. But so far, if you were presiding over that meeting or you were a participant in that meeting, what would you do differently? Besides what was done? What they did do is one of the commissioners asked the lawyer, that was the gentleman sitting next to the chair, and his advice was to take a motion on whether or not the time for a second has passed. What else could, or what could have done, what could have gone differently in that, anybody?
So the mayor could have passed the gavel, because that's what happened in one of our meetings. The mayor passed the gavel and it was the second. So,
The mayor passed the gavel and made the motion?
no, the mayor seconded the motion
Oh, I see.
that somebody else had given that there wasn't a
That's a
second.
good- yeah, I
So
haven't
she
thought of that.
passed the gavel and then, so they could proceed.
Okay, that's one. What about the guy who yells out, you know you're not going to get one? Anybody? He what? What? He was out of order. Why?
He wasn't recognized.
Because he wasn't recognized. That's right. That's right. You know you're not going to get one. You're out of order. You know, you can leave the meeting if you want. That's right. He wasn't recognized. What else could have happened? One of the commissioners could have made a motion in addition to the advice that was given. One of the commissioners could have made a motion that the chair has vacated his responsibilities and to nominate a new chair. That chair is going to straighten right up after that. But they could have done that. Like, what happens if the mayor or the presiding officer in that meeting had to leave the meeting? What would the body do? The body would either nominate the mayor pro tem to proceed to go through the meeting, or if the mayor pro tem was absent, they would nominate one of their own to chair the meeting. So if the chair in that instance is being obstinate, one of the other ones could have nominated somebody else to chair the meeting, and they just could have kept rolling right on through, just as if the chair was wasn't even present. That's pretty extreme, but for a meeting like that, it's probably warranted.
So how can a motion be made when there's already a motion on the table?
So under the rules, there was no second, so it fails. The motion failed.
So could the mayor have just said at that point, there's no second, so we're moving on?
But that's right, but the problem in the video was the mayor wasn't prepared to move, assuming that that gentleman was the mayor, he wasn't prepared to move on. He was being dilatory, as the rules call him. He's unnecessarily delaying the meeting. There was no support for proceeding with that motion that was probably on an agenda. It was probably put forth on the agenda correctly. So we can go back to that. It just gets nasty. There's personal name calling. It's just, I think if you look up contentious council meetings, that's the #1 video that shows up. So amendment. So you've had a motion. The motion is to approve Billy Bowlegs a national monument or a national park, or to file an application. So what happens if somebody wants to include another park in that application, or someone wants to make an amendment? Someone is first recognized. The person who's recognized then puts forth the amendment. I'd like to amend the motion to include South Jetty Park in the city's application. What happens next? Is there a second? Is there support amongst the board to even consider this item? Yes, there's a second. So then you're going to debate including South Jetty Park with the application. And what we're going to do is we're going to distinguish the amendment first. Once the amendment has been approved, assuming the amendment has been approved, then the motion, you have to go back to the main motion for Billy Bowlegs Park to be approved as it is amended to include South Jetty Park. And that process is a little laborious, but what you may find is there may not be support. Somebody may want South Jetty Park included in the application, but they don't want Billy Bowlegs Park, right? So they may vote yes on the amendment, but they may vote no on the main motion. So it's just, you always want to have 2 votes if you're going to amend a motion, to approve the amendment, and then to come back, if the amendment is approved, to come back and approve the motion as it is amended. Many times people will assume that the vote on the amendment approves the motion, and technically it does not. So you can, a couple of the other ways you can amend a motion is you can insert a phrase or a word. You could take out a word or a phrase or a sentence. And then you can do both. You can strike out a word and insert a word. So this is what I just alluded to. If a motion is amended, you're voting and the motion and the consideration of the main motion is put to the side, and everybody's focus is now on the amendment. And all the debate is to discuss the amendment. And then once the amendment is disposed of, whether it's approved or not, then you go back to the main motion. The rules say no more than 2 amendments. Right? So you may have somebody, after 2 amendments, if you have a main motion, you have someone who wants to make an amendment, and then a second commissioner wants to make a second amendment. Well, then why not? The third amendment, the commissioner is just going to make a third amendment. The rules say that limited to 2. Vote those 2 through the system, and then if they want to come back and consider their amendment, that we can afterwards, right? So no more than 2 motions, just because after it just gets too wonky. The idea is to vote it up, vote the amendment up or down, and then move on. Right, so if I can just take a moment more, the bold language on the bottom of the slide, adopting the amendment does not adopt the main motion. You need to come back and have another vote for that. So improper amendments, what can't you do? And it's if it's not germane, or if it's not related to the topic. You know, you can't add a budget increase on an application to amend a park, a national monument. Maybe you could do it, but it's just not germane. It would probably be better suited or more clear if the budget amendment was a separate item. Let's dispose of the application process first, and then go back to the item that's not germane in a separate motion. Amendments that are hostile to the main motion. So in other words, if you have a commissioner who wants to approve an application, an improper amendment is if somebody were to say, I want to insert the word not before approve, right? So now they want to take an amendment on The amendment, the main motion is to approve the motion to file the application. Commissioner X makes a motion to insert the word not before application, so that if amended, the motion is going to be, I move not to approve the application. Well, that's just hostile to the main motion. You could just vote the main motion up or down and achieve the same thing. So it's, hopefully the chair at that point would say your amendment is not in order and not accept it. And amendments dealing with settled matters. We had some conversation earlier that if the body had already spoken earlier in the meeting, the item has already been settled, there's no reason to discuss it again if it's already been determined up or down. And then amendments that are just frivolous or absurd. If it's just wasting everybody's time, those are improper amendments. So the hierarchy of motions. Because meetings can have the propensity to drag on and on and on and on and not have any clear ending sight, Roberts talks about the hierarchy of motions. Some motions, in other words, just trump motions that are pending. In other words, if it's late and a commissioner has just had it, the commissioner is recognized, regardless of where you are in the meeting, the supreme motion is adjourn the meeting. It doesn't matter that there's 5 items still left on the agenda. Roberts talks about the motion to adjourn is going to be right if somebody makes it and it's seconded, well, that is an indication that the body is finished with its work. It cannot do more work. So if somebody is recognized and they make the motion to adjourn and it's seconded, you're calling for a vote. And if that vote is yes, the motion is over. So that's the hierarchy, that's the rule, that is the, if you will, the fix the time to which adjourn the meeting is if someone makes that motion, that is the supreme of all of them. And then it goes all the way down. So if you have competing motions, that's the point I'm trying to make. If you have someone who's making a motion to adjourn and you have somebody who's wanting to recess the meeting and come back after like a cup of coffee, which motion is going to trump? Which motion is going to be recognized? The motion to adjourn. Because it would be so silly to have a motion to recess and then have then consideration on the motion to adjourn right after. So that's just competing motions, is the hierarchy of them. And some of them are debatable or not. You can, on some of these motions, like the fix the time, just to adjourn, that's a non-debatable motion. Or if you want to have a recess, I'm ready for a recess. It could be really contentious up here. So if you were going to debate the recess, well, what are you doing? You're just re-arguing or re-debating the reasons why the commissioner wants to have the recess, right? So the rules say that certain motions are non-debatable for that reason. You just call for the vote immediately. So renewing a motion. Any motion can be renewed at a subsequent session. So I find many times that when someone's on the losing end of a vote, they're ardently protesting, they're ardently fighting to resurrect that motion. They don't want to lose that vote. Well, the answer to that person is just make it at the next meeting. If for purposes of this meeting, the meeting has an agenda, the body has considered the item, the body is now moving on to a new item, you can renew the motion at the next regular meeting. And every time thereafter, there was a group in Sarasota for like a year and a half. They made the same motion at the beginning of their meeting, every meeting for like a year and a half. It was always voted down, but they still made it. So keep that in mind. You can always renew a motion, just not at that meeting. And then you can rescind or amend something previously adopted. So if you wanted to, if there was a reason to amend something that had been adopted at the meeting, generally takes a 2/3 vote. But next month, or next 6 months, if there was a motion approved in February, the current commission can always rescind that, unless there are some contractual issues that you may want to seek legal advice on. But if it's something that's not going to be, there's a pecuniary or a financial issue involved, the body is free to reconsider or rescind or amend something previously adopted. So we made a, yes, ma'am?
Does that have to be on the agenda?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. Or what I've also seen happen is at the end of meetings, the council or the commission has commissioner comments. So what they'll do is at the end of the meeting, they have just been on the negative end of a vote. They'll say, at the next meeting, I'd like to include item, do I have a second? And then if someone else says a second, then it's on the agenda for this debate at the next time, right? The other thing that they could do is at the time when you're approving the agenda, at the subsequent meeting, they can make the motion at that time. I'd like to renew the meeting, renew the motion. To reconsider. So there is a technique or a tool in Roberts where you're at the meeting, the body has voted, but then something happened during the pendency of that meeting where the body may want to take another bite at the apple, right? Earlier, I said that for efficiency purposes, once an item has been resolved, it's over with, you can make it at a next meeting. But you can reconsider a motion, and to prevent abuse, Roberts talks about only those people who are on the prevailing side can make the motion. So if you have an item that passes by a 4-3, there's been public comment at the end of the meeting that maybe the commission has made a terrible mistake. The body can reconsider, but only if a person who voted on the prevailing side makes the motion. Right? In other words, if people want to go home and it's at the end of the meeting, you're going to have to get somebody who voted yes on that to make the motion to reconsider. Before we get to debate, any questions, talk, suggestions, or anything about motions? All right. We're soldiering on. So the fundamental principle in debate is every member has the right for the maximum effort to make his or her position declare the will of the majority. Everybody has the same power. Everybody gets recognized the same. Everybody is the same. The only counterbalance to that is to the extent that it can be tolerated. So I find commissioners many times, they're type A, zealously advocating, they have constituents, their platform is to get certain measures through the government, and they're going to be ardent supporters for that. Well, just because they're going to be zealously advocating for that doesn't mean that they should not be recognized, that the rules are going to bend for them. It's the same rules for everybody. Everybody has the same ability to make their arguments. But you can't go on and on and on and on and on, and you can't be, it's subject to the will of the entire body. So the rules of the debate, we've covered this. Number one, the member must be recognized before they can speak. The maker of the motion has the right to speak first. Under Roberts is the rule to speak is each commissioner or each each member can speak no more than 2 times for 10 minutes apiece. That's what's in the book. But I find many times communities have separate standing orders. They'll say, you're limited to 5 minutes, or you're limited to 7 minutes, or you're not limited at all. Sometimes they give unfettered time to discuss, and how many times they're going to talk, to be recognized to speak. So what this goes into earlier as to who can speak and when is Roberts does afford the ability for someone who has not spoken to be recognized before somebody who has been waiting, if that makes sense. If there's 7 people and one person has been silent pretty much for the whole debate, as soon as that person is recognized, Roberts does say that you can recognize that person for the first time before you recognize a second person for a second time. Debate must be germane. You can't go off and say, if this happens, you can't just, the idea is to keep the focus to the item, and that's another reason why a motion pending is an ability for the chair to control the speaker or to control the proceedings. So if you don't have a time frame, if you don't have standing rules, or you're allowed to speak and be recognized as many times, when does it stop? And you can limit someone's debate by calling the question, or the previous question. And the idea there is that if there's somebody on the board and there's somebody that just has in there, they feel that the item has been talked and debated ad nauseum, what's the process? First what? They need to be recognized. In other words, they can't interrupt. How many times have you seen that? Somebody's in the mid-conversation and they call the question. Well, that's out of order. You have to recognize, you have to be what? You have to be recognized first. So then once you're recognized, the rule is, I like to suspend the rules if there is a rule, or I like to limit debate, or I like to call the question. In other words, I'm ready to vote. I don't need to hear anymore. Then what happens? Well, you need a second. And then there's a vote. It's an incidental motion. And if the body votes affirmatively, well, then guess what? The person who still wants to talk doesn't get to talk. So having said what I had just said, it's once somebody is recognized and they're beginning to speak, there really ought to be no interruptions. None. And the language in Roberts is unless there's a significant procedural mistake, unless something is so bad that you have to interrupt the person. But generally, they have the same rights as everybody, right? So if you're going to interrupt somebody, it's not just to call the order, it's point of order. And we'll get into the process of that. The chair then it's the chair's responsibility at that point to stop the proceedings. If the chair doesn't know why there's a point of order being called, the chair has to find out. And the chair has to dispose of the point of order. So here's an example.
Mr. Chairman, I want to make it quite clear that this amendment is completely irrelevant. I served as a law enforcement officer for 27 years. It is a tough job, and good police officers deserve your support. It's interesting to see my colleagues on the other side of the aisle support the police when it is politically convenient to do so. Law enforcement officers risk their lives every day. They deserve better, and the American people deserve. I have the floor, Mr. Jordan. What, did I strike a nerve? Law enforcement officers deserve better than to be utilized as pawns. And you and your colleagues are ashamed of yourself.
The gentlelady will suspend and the clock will be stopped. I want to admonish members. They must not interrupt someone who has the time.
Mr. Chairman, can I ask a
You
question?
simply can't shout out. If you think that someone is saying
I agree.
Mr. Jordan, you don't know what in the heck you're talking about. You know nothing about what law enforcement officers
I know about my
do,
motive.
and you're using them as pawns because it serves your
everyone-
ridiculous political purpose.
Val, everyone must suspend. I am making the point. No one may shout out when someone else has the time. Not Mr. Gomert,
Question, Mr. Chairman.
not Mr. Jordan, nobody.
Not Mr. Cicilline,
Not Ms.
not Ms.
He
Demings.
didn't do that. But nobody.
Not Mr. Jordan.
Yeah, not Ms. Ms.
Nobody.
Cicilline. Okay, no, but I agree with that, but I have
Then
a
how
question.
do we, everybody,
I have a
I
question.
will simply, there is no
I got the same
question.
question.
Nobody may shout out.
When you give a
see,
speech, Mr. Chairman,
nobody
about
may-
motives and questioning motives, and then our motives are questioned,
emotionally
how do we
charging
address
for
that?
me
The rules
because
allow
I
a
was law
request
enforcement
of
officer.
words
I have
point of
watched them
inquiry.
live and die and you know nothing about that,
We
and to
address-
utilize them as political
Mr. Chairman,
pawns.
I have a point of
pisses me
inquiry.
Off.
People
Chairman, I
will
have a point
address
of
comments to
inquiry.
the chair.
Mr.
The rules
Chairman.
The rules do not permit shouting out when someone else has the time. The only thing you may do when someone else has the time is you may raise a point of order if you think it proper, and the chair will then rule on the
Point of order, Mr. Chairman.
The gentleman will state his point of order.
So you gave us a lecture on people questioning our motives. When someone questions our motives, how do we address it when they're in the act of questioning our
That is not a
motives?
point of order.
Yes, it is.
That is not a point of order.
Mr. Chairman, may I continue, please?
That is not a point of order. Ms. Demings
Parliamentary.
has the time, and the clock will resume.
Any comments, questions on what you just saw? Mr. Jordan tries to interrupt Ms. Demings, who has the floor. I didn't know if he said point of order. But once he says point of order, I guess Ms. Demings then got mad and then attacked her colleague. But everything should have stopped as soon as the point of order is made to allow the chair to do what? To rule on the point of order. In this case, it obviously didn't proceed that way. All right, so rules of speaking as much as possible. And again, I recognize, this is Robert's Rules of Order, and I recognize that many times councils, particularly committees, are familiar, people are familiar with one another, their neighbors. So the idea that they're going to continually be not use names, or they're not, or number three, speak through the chair, sometimes gets lost, or or people don't recognize the importance of that. It's because if it's 5 o'clock on a Wednesday and you're coming into a committee meeting and you're going to be discussing something, it's not necessarily that all important, or maybe it's not as adversarial that you should be speaking through the chair. But in the hearing that we just watched, it's crucial that all comments should be through the chair. And once Ms. Demings starts speaking directly, once they start speaking directly to one another, you can see what happens is they just start tit for tat. It just starts going back and forth. So the idea is point of order and then direct everything through the chair. And then if you watch like Parliament in England, everything is through the chair. They face the speaker and everything is Mr. Speaker or Madam Speaker. They don't even address, or they do say their opposition or the opponent or the government or the opposition, but they'll never address an individual person. Why? Just from your own experience. Yeah, if somebody calls you out, you go, oh yeah, says who, says you, says me, says you, and then you're off to the races. So remarks must be germane. If you're chairing the meeting, this is a good phrase. Members will kindly keep their comments strictly to the topic. And no attacks on personalities, no name calling. I did notice that on your civility pledge in the entrance to this chamber, it does say no attacks on personalities or no name calling. You're going to stick to the issues, which is nice. So how do we enforce the rules once they're being violated? So the very first thing that we're going to do is, or Roberts does, is it recognize standing rules. If you have an issue that's happening in your jurisdiction, the body can address it by making a rule. It could be anything. That's pretty consistent. Is if I'm going to be a citizen and I'm going to come before the board, well, the board has to allow me that opportunity, but there's going to be I have to abide by the chamber's rules that are made for me to give those. I don't have free rein, is what I'm trying to say. Some examples are how long and how many times a speaker can speak, and the times when the meeting will adjourn. We heard earlier that one jurisdiction has a hard stop, 12 a.m. or midnight. If the meeting's still going on, sorry, it's over. That's a standing rule, we're done. And if you're going to proceed beyond that, there's a whole procedure on suspending the rules and having to address that. Roberts talks about this. It's also in your Madeira Beach's standing, I guess that's standing rules, the policy handbook. It's at the very end is that if you're going to do something that's against the rules, the motion should be, I move to suspend the rules. And what you're doing is you're alerting all of your members that there is a rule that they do not have to allow, but the person who's been recognized is also communicating to the public that there is a rule, that the commission has already addressed this issue. So by prefacing, I move to suspend the rules, that the meeting end at 9 o'clock, or whatever, however, whatever you're trying to do, by prefacing it, by saying I move to suspend the rules, is you're allowing the body to revisit something that they've already accomplished by a standing rule. So we've hit this point a couple of times. Once the point of order is made, the chair determines the point of order, subject to appeal. So in our, Nader, I can't remember who the chair was of the meeting that we just watched, but if somebody had an issue with the way that the chair had ruled, then they could do what? They could appeal to the entire body, and then it becomes a motion of the entire body to what? Shall the decision of the mayor be sustained? So the mayor is given the ability to preside over the meeting. The mayor has the authority to enforce the rules. And if the mayor does that and the body doesn't like it, then the body can appeal that decision. Some of the tools for the mayor for enforcing the rules is if he or she senses that there's no opposition, they can just rule. What becomes very interesting is when there is opposition and the mayor thinks that there is no opposition. That sometimes can be fun. You can use unanimous consent for routine business or questions of little importance. So without any objection, the mayor I move to, and whatever the proposition is. There's no need to needlessly go through the process of the being recognized, the motion, seconding the motion, debate on the motion, and then putting the question. So if it's a slight breach of order, what does the presiding officer do? Roberts talks about tapping the gavel lightly. But it was interesting in that clip, I don't know if you noticed it, but when the chair took the gavel and started hitting the gavel, what did the representative from Florida do? She started slapping the table. I mean, I don't know if you picked up on that, but he used the gavel. He tried to bring her back into order, and it just, oh, that's what we're doing now? Okay, now I'm going to start doing it. So tread lightly. So minor breaches would be speaking without being recognized, addressing first names, talking about things that are not germane. So the chair raps the gavel, lightly points at the fault, and advises the member to avoid it. And then the member is still recognized. You're not taking the member's rights to speak away. So if it gets to be more serious, and I highlighted that may do harm, and then I've all capsed how crucial it is that the chair tries to remain as impartial as possible. You know, the chair, in our charters, they all say the mayor is going to have a vote. So the mayor is entitled to have a point of view on any measure that's pending. But still, through the rules, the mayor is supposed to stop the proceedings, and is supposed to, if the mayor knows what the point of order is, the mayor can make a decision. Or if the mayor does not know what the point of order is, has the obligation to flush it out. So then once the chair hears what the argument is, then the chair rules. There has to be a determination on the point of order. Remember, you're wanting to do the will of the majority, but recognize the minority. You don't want to trample the minority. So it's really important that the mayor rules and not just, oh, stop it, or it just continues. It's an important step, because what happens after that is there could be an appeal. So this is the appeal. So here is the governing body. They elect or appoint a chair or presiding officer. The chair runs the meeting. The chair rules on all decorum and rules on questions of order. So once the chair rules, the floor is then open for someone to appeal the decision of the chair. And what does that need? They need a second. You may just have somebody who is not going down easy, and I appeal the decision of the chair. If there's no second, the measure fails for a second, and they move right on to the next order of business. So that the proceeding generally follows this order. Once a person is recognized, the decision of the chair has been, the mayor says the decision of the chair has been appealed, and then the mayor puts the question, shall the decision of the chair be the judgment of the assembly? So you're sustaining what the mayor has done. And then you call for the vote. So if you have an obstinate mayor, like in the example that we saw, or we have an obstructionist mayor, and you go through this process of appealing the chair, and the chair still does not abide by what the body is wanting, you can move to vacate the chair. You can move to not recognize someone else as the chair for that, either that item or that meeting. So how do you really, like the big enforcement tool is you're just having someone who's not playing nice in the sandbox. What is it that you do? I want to talk about minutes for a second, because in minutes, what's being recorded in the minutes? What has happened? Many times, clerks' offices will also put in extra, so-and-so said, this was presented, just other information. But according to Roberts, the only thing that goes in the minutes is what happened. What was the motion? What was the vote? Whether it was approved or whether it was denied. So if you have somebody who's really being prickly in a meeting, it's not in the minutes. If someone were to go back later, if your clerk was taking a very conservative view of minute taking, and somebody was trying to figure out what a particular commissioner was doing, well, today they would look on TV or they would look on YouTube and they would be able to see it. But at the official record, nothing's in the official record. Nothing's in there. So naming an offender is the point where you've had someone you've been spoken to, you've been warned, maybe you haven't been recognized, but your behavior persists. So now what happens is somebody gets recognized and they say, I move to take down the words of the offender. And you'll hear somebody say, take down the words, or they'll just say words. And that is instructions for the clerk to start writing down everything. That is the part where the clerk is now transcribing everything that's being said and done. Why? Because later you're going to have a censure hearing, or later you're going to have some sort of hearing to punish the person, to call out, to let them know what it is that they've done. And they're going to need a record, and that's the official record. You're going to need that in order to have a censure. You're going to need that in order to take away their speaking privileges, or whatever it is that you decide, the body decides how they're going to punish. So there's an example at the bottom of the slide. The chair has repeatedly directed you to refrain from offensive personal references when speaking. 3 times the chair has ordered you to be seated, and you have nevertheless attempted to continue speaking. So then once that happens, we just spoke about the minutes. If the member obliges or the member obeys, the member technically can keep on talking. The member is to be given a chance to withdraw the offensive comment or to apologize. If they fail to do so, Roberts says they can be asked to remove from the debate or remove from the hall. And then if the member denies having said it, I didn't do anything wrong, then you can use the recording. You can then have what we saw earlier about the Alderman Cooper, about not being recognized. You can have someone read back the minutes. So good presiding officers and poor presiding officers, a good one will clearly point out the fault. We'll try to work with the offensive person to try to clearly point, not that the person is at fault, is whatever they're doing is violating the rules, or whatever they're doing is violating Robert's Rules of Order. It's not to, you're not criticizing or attacking the person. You're suggesting that they're not following the procedure. So the person who's offensive can apologize or withdraw the objectionable statements. The person can be instructed to take a break from speaking for a time, or the chair can or threaten, I won't recognize you if you persist. But that won't work if the chair hasn't been recognizing the persons throughout the whole meeting. You follow what I mean? That's another reason why it's nice at the beginning of the meeting. If you're doing that for everybody, you can't just all of a sudden say, I'm not going to recognize it. Well, you haven't recognized anybody all night. Why are you going to start now? All right. The person I find who feels that they're on the losing end of a measure, or feels that they're being bullied or being steamrolled, maybe they're not aware that they can make a motion to amend. Maybe they're not aware that the item can be reconsidered. So a chair or a good presiding officer will say, you can make this motion next meeting, nothing's stopping you, but for purposes of tonight, the body has made this motion. So you can amend the motion, or you can try to rescind the motion, and you need a second. And if the governing body wants to entertain that, then that's what we'll do. So it's the old 3 strikes and you're out routine. So there's 3, you give the person 3 warnings, you give the person 3 opportunities to make good. And then my advice is always, before the chair takes a final measure, is to consult with everybody, is to say to everybody, this is what I want to do. Are you in favor of this? If it's asking the person to leave, or if it's not recognizing the person for 10 minutes or whatever, however it shakes out. And then to follow through with the discipline, whatever the body supports. So here is an example.
We have an agenda that we're here to do. It's our job to get this agenda through.
Madam Chair, there's nothing more important than how this council operates, and that we're free to take our positions and act on behalf of the best interests of the city. I refer you to the Council Perks assisted me with this, Rule 27-47. If a member disobeys a rule in the procedural bylaw or a chair's ruling, he's failed to apologize, that you have to give him that you are required to give or you may give a verbal warning to the member. That's the only remedy available. I would ask you that you use that remedy.
Okay, Mayor Ford, I did say when we started that, in fact, I did not hear you, but there were members of council that did. So I'm asking you, Mayor, if you would please apologize so we can continue with the agenda. That's my ruling.
Madam Speaker, apologize for following the rules and asking the other members of council to follow the rules? That's what I'm apologizing for? No, I don't think there's an apology necessary. If I said something derogatory, if I did what he's accusing me of, yes, I would apologize, but I did not say that.
Well,
the Madam Clerk was right there. All I asked him to do is take his seat while people were asking questions. That's the rules, not walk around. That's it. There's nothing to apologize about.
Okay, Mayor Ford.
So, no, I'm not going to apologize. If I did something wrong, I would apologize. I did absolutely nothing wrong besides asking him to take his seat like you do every 10 times a meeting. You tell members to take their seat.
Mayor Ford.
Take their seat when people are asking questions. That's all I did.
Councilman Wong felt that you said it in a manner that was threatening.
Oh,
and
well,
so
you know what?
That is why it's...
No, you know what, Madam Speaker? I'm sorry. You know what?
Okay, thank you. you, Mayor Ford. Thank you, Mayor Ford. Mayor Ford, that's all I wanted you to say. Okay, Councillor Grimes, are you up on a point of order or a point of personal privilege? A personal privilege, Councillor Grimes.
I'd just like to remind all my colleagues, for what it's worth, it is World Kindness Day today, and I remember the members of the public, so if we can take that in the spirit of moving this agenda forward, would be great.
So what, we should all give each other a hug today. Councillor.
So that is I conclude my presentation. Any questions? I did want to come back to something that was raised earlier, if that's all right. I have heard the objection that it's been given to me that Mark, under the Sunshine Law, at a commission meeting is the only time I get to speak to my fellow council members on measures. Now you're telling me that I can't. And I'm saying, and my advice to the commissioner was, I'm not saying that you can't speak to your commissioners. That's what Robert's Rules of Order is about. It's just a structured conversation. So my client in this particular instance wanted the ability to hear from everybody in the public and then wanted to hear what all of her colleagues thought about a particular measure before formulating a motion for the body to decide. And I'll close with this. Under Roberts, is the agenda is published in advance. You have the opportunity to speak to the administration. You are obligated to come to the meeting prepared. So you should be coming, under Roberts, you should be coming to the meeting to do what? To vote. And it's if you want, and the follow-up advice is if you want the ability to speak freely, to see how your colleagues think, it's a workshop. Schedule the matter for a workshop. But once the agenda is published, we're coming to the meeting, and we're going to hit this business. We're going to vote on it, and then we're going to go. It's not the time that we're going to debate and discuss and deliberate. You're there to transact the business. So that's it. It's been a pleasure. Thank you for your attendance. Thank you for your attention, and I enjoyed being here. Thank you. Right back. Thank you.